this time we only have 16 candidates instead of 21. Because nobody was paying attention when I thanked everyone. I'm going to thank everyone now. And I'd like to thank Margie, first of all, I'm going to introduce him. He's going to be the moderator. I'm going to give her a proper introduction in a minute. The organizing committees from Upper Fall, Neil, Kimberly Wilkinson, Ray Jackson, the new Pilot Fair Council of the host community, Stephen Feinstein, of course John Rice, Barbara Darnell, Wabin, Maureen, Baker, and Sally in the private court. Absolutely want to thank the candidates for participating in this event. Please be aware that this is being filmed. We're going to submit this to New TV, so hopefully it will be available. And so thanks again to folks from New TV. And finally, the League of Voters website has information about the charter review process and other valuable information about the election. So, without any further ado, I would like to announce the schedule. First, we're going to have the school committee candidates come up, Ward 2, and then followed by Ward 5. Each of you will be up for about 20 minutes. You will have an opportunity after the initial questions for a closing statement of 1 minute. 1 minute closing statement. So you'll each be up here for 20 minutes. At approximately 8:10, we'll start out with the Alderman at large candidates. We'll have Ward 5 come up first, Ward 3 afterwards. I'm sorry, Ward 8 will be first, then Ward 5, then Ward 3, and then finally Ward 2. Before I introduce Margie, I'd just like to read a message from one of the candidates who was not able to come. David Kalis is celebrating an anniversary. He's in New York City. He asked me to read this. Thank you for inviting me to this important event. Unfortunately, I'm out of town and cannot attend. If people would like to learn more about me, they can visit my website, kalisfornewton.com, or don't hesitate to email or call me with questions. With my background in business and experience from the board, I am well positioned to help the city address what I see as 3 key issues: development, infrastructure, and unfunded liabilities. As a Newton native, I continue to be passionate about serving my neighbors and friends and ask for your vote on November 3rd. Signed, David A. Kalis, author of Vodka Shot Pickle Chaser. I have less than 1 minute left. Marjorie Ahrens is standing to my left. Sitting to my left. And it's a distinct pleasure and honor to have her here. As I'm sure many of you know, she is a very distinguished journalist in both print and broadcast. She has been the recipient of Emmy Awards and other national awards for excellence. She served as an editorial director of WCBB-TV, which is Channel 5. And she also produced a program there, 5 on 5, that many of you probably remember. Many, many years ago, she also was the political editor of a small tabloid called the Newton Times. And so thank you very much, Margie, and I'm going to sit down and let the festivities begin.
Thank you, sir. We're going to start with the candidates from our school committee from Ward 2. So please come up. While they're coming up, I should say that my other distinction, sir, is that I really am a townie, and my parents moved to Newton in 1950 and brought me with them to Ward Street, and I went to Bigelow and Newton High School, and so it's in the blood. So the 2 candidates for Ward 2 School Committee are Margaret Albright and Cyrus Barr. Am I pronouncing that right? Vagar. Okay, I should have asked in advance. Margaret Albright was elected to the school committee in 2013 and brings 25 years of nonprofit management experience to her service. She has an MBA from Northeastern, has worked in arts management, technology industry, and public broadcasting. She was co-founder of Newton STEM, the goal of which, as you know, is to advance science, technology, engineering, and creation. Cyrus Vagar is a 2015 graduate of Newton North High School and surely brings a fresh perspective and recent experience to the discussion, and congratulations on running so soon out of the gate. The purpose of our discussion, and it's going to seem formal, is really to explore the candidates' positions on policy issues, their values, and also see if we can discern something about their character. So in light of that latter goal, I'd like to start out by asking you both if you could talk a little bit about a time that you were part of a team and worked with that team and made a contribution to the articulated goal of that group. So how about starting with you, Cyrus?
Okay, great, thank you. Glad you guys could all come out tonight. You know, no Patriots game this week, so big crowd. So I'm Cyrus Vega. I graduated from Newton North in 2015, which was about 4 months ago. And high school is basically all about being part of a team. We have our class, we have our class officers. So my entire high school career was being part of a team.
And do you want to talk anything about, how you might have functioned in that team context?
I mean, sure. As a student, I saw a lot of issues, and I would always bring them to light. And I think a good school committee and a good organization works when there's a lot of diverse views coming together and everyone's working together.
Margaret, I'd like to hear from you.
Well, I think that the school committee is probably the most interesting team that I've been part of. In order to get things done as a school committee, it takes some collaboration, some willingness to compromise, willingness to come to consensus. And over the last 2 years, I've done quite a bit of work with the team. I've worked on goal setting. I'm part of the communications subcommittee, and we've been working to put together some outreach to families, including a survey that will come out in a couple of weeks. And I think that what we accomplished in the last 2 years is significant, particularly in terms of the programs we've put in place for the social and emotional learning of our students following the tragedies in 2013. And I think that it's been a great learning experience to figure out how to work well together to come to a conclusion.
Okay, when I was growing up in Newton, Newton was routinely included among the top 10 school systems in the country. And then, say 30, 40 years ago, it was among the state's top 3 public school systems. Now, there's some concern because it has slipped to number 12. When we continue to fund the school so generously, with such a large percentage of the city's budget, how do you react to this notion of slippage, and what's it all about? Jump in. This is going to be informal.
Well, I look at it a little bit differently. I work in the world of nonprofits, and one of the things that I have worked with organizations in is school turnaround. And it's very difficult to compare districts that are very, very disparate. Newton is the 8th largest school district in Massachusetts. We have a much more diverse student population, both in terms of income, ethnicity, and culture, than many of the districts that score at the top. The top districts are much smaller and much more homogeneous. And as for things being different now than they were 30 years ago, we have, since 1993, we have had Massachusetts curriculum frameworks, which means that each and every school district across the state is working to teach the same basic curriculum framework. And when we're looking at everybody doing the same thing, then we find that there are, slight differences in terms of achievement. I think the way we measured achievement 30 years ago was pretty subjective, and now we have much more objective measures.
Well, Cyrus, you have the most recent experience with this. To what extent are you aware of Newton's standings among other public school systems? How was it for you?
Sure. We education for ourselves. But the truth is the school system has slipped a lot. Drugs in our schools are a serious issue that are not being discussed right now. I'm not talking just about light drugs like marijuana, you might have your personal views on that, but cocaine, heroin, they are all affecting our school system right now. And I truthfully do not feel they're being discussed. I feel like as a result of that, our standards have slipped quite a bit.
To what extent are you aware of drugs particularly being a problem in the schools?
Well, I'm aware of drugs being a problem across Massachusetts. In the last 7 years, the number of young people between the ages of 15 to 24 who've been diagnosed with hepatitis C has grown 79%. A recent report from the Mass Department of Public Health showed that most of the drug use was in white, suburban, and urban populations, and that it comes mainly from the abuse of prescription drugs and the easy availability of heroin. So while it's maybe a problem in our schools, we're not alone. It's a problem in schools all across suburban and rural Massachusetts. And it's a problem that can't be solved by the schools by themselves, or by the healthcare sector, or by the police. This is something that as a community, we have to work together. All of those, the law enforcement, healthcare, education, to figure out how to address this. And in fact, the legislature has a bill that they've just introduced, which would require every school system to do what's called SBIRT, or brief intervention and referral to treatment for all students in 7th, 9th, and 11th grade.
Let me skip to something that's totally different. Westboro Public Schools offer full-day kindergartens for an annual fee from parents. Is this a consideration in Newton? Should it be? And let me share with me, if you will, your thoughts on getting to full-day kindergarten. Cyrus?
All right, perfect. So yesterday night I was actually on YouTube watching this exact same discussion from 2 years ago. It literally looks the exact same. There's a challenger here. So I was right, you were there, and you were asking questions right there. And the exact,
I was asking you questions.
Apologies. Someone else was. But there's someone else.
I may have been.
Okay. Questions were being asked, and the exact same question about full-day kindergarten came up. I'm sure a lot of you were eager. The challenger right here said she wasn't so sure about it. She liked how we're going now. Ms. Albright said we need full-day kindergarten. The fact is, you can see over the last 2 years, full-day kindergarten has not been instituted in the Newton Public Schools. And I think the true question should be, why haven't we done it over the last 2 years? And not, how can we do it in the future? Because clearly, I don't think it's going to happen. I was actually talking to school committee member Ellen Gibson earlier this year at a one-on-one meeting with her. And she told me that she wasn't so sure she was for full-day kindergarten. So I think anyone saying that full-day kindergarten is clear-cut and it needs to happen is not being totally honest with the voters in Newton.
Could you respond from the perspective of somebody who's been there for the last 2 years?
Actually, I'm going to be quite honest with you, and we do need full-day kindergarten. But it takes 5 votes to get things done on the school committee. We've had a lot of priorities over the last 2 years, and believe me, I have brought up full-day kindergarten every chance I get. My colleague Steve Siegel back there can attest to that. We need to make this move, but I, by myself, am unable to move the public school system. That's not how the school committee works. As I said in my explanation about working as a team, we collaborate, we work together, we come to consensus. This is something we have not come to consensus about. But I feel very strongly that our students need more time for not only for academics, but they need more time for the social issues and the play that comes with kindergarten. We have much more robust standards now than we did even a few years ago. There's so much to cover. We need full day in order to cover it. And then, of course, the other issue is that our current schedule is an absolute nightmare for working parents. 3 days a week, kindergarten ends at 12:30. And then another 2 days, it's done at 3 o'clock. And I've had people call me, constituents call me in tears saying, I couldn't get after school for my child at 12:30. I work in Worcester. how am I supposed to be there to pick up my child at 12:30? What am I supposed to do? So I think it's time for us to really look at what our community needs and make this change.
Now, when I raised the question, there was a reference made to the Westboro approach that would have fees for parents and possibly considering some sort of financial aid for parents who cannot afford it. Has your push for a full-day kindergarten dealt, at least conceptually, with some of those financing issues?
Absolutely. I've talked with my colleagues and with the superintendent about the possibility of fees. We charge fees now. It's called after-school programs. We just shifted that fee and that cost to someone else. The full day is paid for by parents. It's just not paid to the public schools. I would love to see it be free, and it should be. I mean, we're talking about universal pre-K in across the state and across the country, and we haven't even got to the point of having a full-day kindergarten. So I think we have a lot of work to do, and I'd like to get busy and do some of that work.
One of the other issues that we hear about in the community has to do with later start time at the high school level, and or perhaps for all students, I'm not sure which, but Cyrus, just having come out of the system, you must have some thoughts on that.
Yes, oh my god, yes, I have a lot of thoughts on that. How many of you here, show of hands, have a kid who's in the public schools right now? Okay. How many of you have kids who are in high school right now? And how many of those kids are actually asleep at midnight every night? Okay, there we go. The truth is, our kids are staying up way too late, and they're getting up way too early. 7:50 as a start time or 7:40 doesn't make any sense at all. It seems like it came out of thin air. It doesn't relate to anything. The health effects of starting stuff too early and kids not getting enough sleep are just coming out now. We don't even know what it's going to be like in 10, 20, 30 years. We need to change that immediately. I have a plan. It's actually on my website. We'll flip the start times between elementary, make them earlier, because a lot of elementary school students are asleep at midnight every night. So that's my plan.
Well, actually, the school committee's taking this one on, and there is a working group right now working on the issue of start time. It would be lovely if it was just as easy as flipping times, but it's, as I said before, we're the 8th largest school district. We have almost 13,000 students. We have over 1,000 employees. For any of you who are parents at Newton South, Oak Hill, or Brown, you know that there's only one road that gets you to all 3 of those schools. And you know that the traffic at Route 9 and Parker Street is absolutely crazy in the morning. So all of these things come into play. It's not just adding another bus. It's not just flipping times. So we're working on, working group is working on this right now and is going to come up with a roadmap. But you know, start time isn't the only stressor that our students have. There's a lot of other things that are stressful for students.
All right, before you go into a whole laundry list of stress causers, let's see about potential questions from the audience. With all of those parents of school children out there, I'm sure there are some folks who do have questions. Gentlemen with that.
Yeah, my name's Frank Walsey. Something that I've always wondered about. We give our student athletes a letter, and we let them go around the school, and you remember when you were in high school how important it was when the guy showed up with a letter on his sweater. And that's for achievement in athletics. Has anybody ever thought about giving our scholars a letter for scholarship and let them go around the campus with a nice sweater, with a letter, and the Newton?
Yeah.
Recognize the scholars, not just the athletes.
Any thoughts on that?
Yeah, I'll speak into that. I don't think it's about who's the best in the school system. Newton's so competitive as it is. I see it at the high school all the time. Who got an A on the test, who got a B on the test. That's not really what it's all about. It's about who's tried the hardest. And in Newton, almost every student goes on to college. Honestly, it's not even that much of a competition because we all go to our own place. So giving students a letter, you know, just because they did well, I don't think is a good idea. And I think they do get an honors on their report card. I think I got that maybe once, but yeah.
Margaret?
You know, and I'm gonna agree with Cyrus on this, there's an awful lot of competition, and, I would be hesitant to add any more competition to that. I think it's a stressor for students. There's a lot of pressure from home, more so than from school, to succeed. And I really think that that we need to dial it back. I mean, we don't have class rank in our Newton schools. You're in, you know, certain quartiles of the class, but there is no class rank. There's no valedictorian. We don't do things that way because it's another way to kind of push kids to compete, which isn't the point.
Well, I have pages of questions, but we're in competition with the clock, so I would invite each one of you to sum up whatever is on your mind right now. You've got a minute each. So, Margaret, if you want to go first, we'll do alphabetical order.
Well, first I want to say thanks to the Upper Falls, Waban, and Highlands area councils. I really appreciate this, and thank you, Marcy, for being the moderator, and thank you, Cyrus, for coming and speaking with us. I hope that you will vote for me on November 3rd. I bring a lot of experience, judgment, and maturity to the school committee, and I would love to serve you for another 2 years. Thank you.
Cyrus?
All right, great. So I'm Cyrus Vegar. I made a number of commitments. I'll donate my pay to charity if I'm elected. I'm not taking donations because I really am running this for the students. The students need a vote. Right now in the school committee, our students don't even have a vote in their own future. It's only parents on the school committee. It doesn't make sense. Parents can't run the schools better than students can run the schools. We need to work together. So I just ask for your vote. If you're interested, shoot me an email, cyrusvegar.com. I have a lot more literature. I wish we had more time. Thank you to Tri-Council for putting this on. It's a really great opportunity, and I hope to see you guys soon.
Terrific. Thank you very much. We're now going to go into the Ward 5 School Committee race. So you could please come up. Susan Hoffman and Steve Siegel. Welcome. Susan Hoffman is a 28-year resident of Newton Upper Falls, and she and her husband raised 4 children who all graduated from Newton schools. Susan is in her second term on the Newton Upper Falls Area Council, where she serves as treasurer and is a founding board member of the Newton 9/11 Memorial Committee, in addition to working as the business manager for a consulting firm in Brookline for the past 27 years. Stephen Siegel is completing his 4th year as a member of the Newton School Committee and is running for re-election from Ward 5. He's the father of 2 students in the Newton Public Schools, and he owns a structural engineering firm based in Newton Center. Before we get into the policy analysis, I wonder can you think of a time professionally that something that you did prompted criticism? And I wonder if you can talk a little bit about how you felt, how you responded, and what emerged from that criticism.
Well, to be brutally honest, as they say, I've been criticized a lot, over the years. I'm probably the oldest candidate in addition to being the tallest. Being the oldest, but at various times over the years, at my most recent position, where I'm still in for the last 27 years, things happen. You get criticized. I just, would think. I would just sit back and, okay, let me check that out and I'll get back to you. And we've always worked it out. And obviously I have longevity there, so it has worked out. So they still like me.
Steve, what comes to mind with you?
Well, I'll reference some time on the school committee. Working on our building plannings I spent a lot of time advocating for new plans to renovate in a large service, and have taken my relationship with my constituents to heart, wanting to make sure that they understand that I'm listening to them, that I'm taking into consideration their perspectives, and found early on in the service process that people whose judgment I deeply respected, whose friendship I valued, took a very different position than I, and criticized me seriously for taking a different position. I think that the approach that I took and continue to take is to continue to be open to perspectives expressed by them, to always make sure that they understand where I'm coming from when I have a different position, with the appreciation that even if we don't agree, maybe we can move forward together if we at least have an understanding of each other's positions.
You mentioned the Service project. The system has undertaken and brought into reality some long talked about expensive capital projects. Is this it for a while now, or how do you assess our future needs for building renovation or even replacement?
I personally think there should be some more, this doesn't consider part, but I do believe that we are getting more children into the schools, into our city. We're building these, giant houses, tearing down the little ones, building giant houses, that brings a lot more children. And the Avalon, for instance, the types of projects are bringing a lot more children. They have to go to school somewhere. And it's like my particular neighborhood up the Falls, the school committee, and it's not Foresight, 30-some years ago, gave away all of these schools and made housing out of them. And, adding more people and reducing the amount of schools. And I believe in small neighborhood schools as opposed to mega schools that have been built. And I'm not blaming Steve for this, because obviously you're not doing much. But anyway, it's, these mega schools, I don't think, maybe perhaps they're good for the people that live right next door, but they're not good for the rest of the town. And the reason why Margaret was talking about but the reason she was talking about the one way to get into those schools, so it's because it's the one thing, a lot of the Upper Falls kids go there. They cannot get there without someone driving them. They have to be driven by the bus, or they have to be driven by their parents or their own cars if they're in high school. And to get there, there's only the one way, and that's why it's so much. But if they were the elementary school children, I don't think should have to be driven across town to go to school. They should be able to go to school in their local neighborhood. And I, for one, think that we should build smaller schools. Upper Falls is not the only neighborhood that doesn't have an elementary school. And I just think it's unconscionable that we don't.
Stephen, where are you on this, the need for future capital projects, and, where is the money going to come from? We have an override, for example, for the current projects. Does this mean that the city has to lurch from one override to the next? Stephen first, and then...
Yeah, well, it's a great question. We are in the middle of an extremely ambitious school building process. As you may know, we are almost finished with the rebuilding of Ainger Elementary School. We're about to start with the rebuilding of Service Elementary School, and then Cabot will follow a few years after that. The purpose of this work is to improve the quality of the buildings, because Newton has let our elementary schools go for a generation or so, and at the same time we're looking to, in addition to quality, we're looking to expand capacity to give us flexibility. We also have just acquired the Aquinas School. It's almost hard to say, and the Aquinas School offers us a variety of opportunities or options for how to relieve some of the space issues on the north side of town. In terms of how we're financing, as you know, we passed an override in 2013, which provided funding for the first 3 schools. I suspect that there will be a little bit of a respite when these 3 schools plus the Aquinas work is done. It takes a tremendous amount of resources, not just financial, but human power, both for our elected officials as well as the volunteer organizations and committees, the design review committee, et cetera. There's a lot, and so we have a need for this work. We're in the middle of it. I can't tell you exactly what, well, the city has developed a long-range plan. It does go out 20 years. We do adjust it and update it every year or so based on enrollment.
Now, Susan mentioned something that's kind of interesting, and that has to do with the whole notion of the walk to school. I mean, every time we drive by the Anger School, we joke that the bricks are going up now, and that isn't exactly a little red schoolhouse. What about our neighborhood schools, just a thing of the past? Where do you stand on that?
So I guess my take is that neighborhood schools are a thing of the present. 30 years ago, the last elementary school that closed. We had up to 25 schools, we now have 15, but the last one closed 30 years ago. So for a generation, we have been delivering a high quality of education to our children in these 15 schools. We continue to do so. So saying that we don't have neighborhood schools, I guess it's a matter of how we want to define it. But I think that the school communities, each school community will say that they've got a neighborhood school, whether they are a 500-person student school like Mason Rice or a 310-student school like Zervis. So my experience and what I hear from the parents of these schools is that we have neighborhood schools now.
May I say something about that? We have neighborhood schools in those neighborhoods. There are neighborhoods that do not have one. Ours does not. Upper Falls absolutely has nothing like that. We have space for them, but the school committee last year, I've been advocating for a neighborhood school for the last 4 years. Zervis, the way the override was written, I didn't vote for it, but the way that particular override was written was so that it was going to study the process. So I know a lot of people that voted for it in order to study the process. They did not vote for it to say, let's go to make a school like Zervis. I know many people that felt that way. They were happy to have an override, but they were not happy to have it be for a giant school built on a wetland, which Zervis is. And that part of it is, I think, unfunctional, since the school committee then turned around and said, well, sorry, we got our override, so you're not getting a school. And they don't care, Alderman gets 2, we get none. But we're not the only neighborhood. I believe Lower Falls doesn't have one, and
Well, the question is also, in Ward 8, I think somebody in the audience mentioned Highland Avenue, and there's Wells Avenue. If there are 40B housing projects, I shouldn't use the word project, 40B housing built there, and there are a lot of kids, are we looking at another elementary school?
So I want to say something about the size of our schools, and I want to say something my first reaction when I hear the term mega schools. When we had 25 elementary schools, they had a population of a little over 10,000. It was over 400 students per school. We now have 15 elementary schools. We have a population that's 12 and a half, or approaching 13. We have under 400. So the school size, the average elementary school size right now is less than it was when we had a school around every corner.
doesn't Countryside have a lot more than that?
Certainly, we have up to the mid to upper 400s. But I think my point is that we have a relatively stable population in our schools. As we're building our new schools, not only will they have student capacities in the mid to upper 400s, but they are right-sized for the first time. We're building adequate square footage based on state standards to give kids the education that we're trying to give them in this day and age. That means that a 450 or 500 student school right now is nothing like what students experienced 5 years ago in Bowen with 500 students in a non-enough room. So we are making good decisions about the size and the quality of space we make. I'll also note that we did have neighborhood schools, or we had schools around the corner 30 years ago. Times have changed. We've sold off a lot of our spaces, and it's, sure. They're hard to come by. Our focus is to provide the best education we can for our children, to invest as well as we can. And I look at this as a situation where in some of these outlying neighborhoods that lost their schools 30 years ago, like Oakville Park, like Upper Falls, like Lower Falls, like the Highlands, like Renanville, that there are times when it makes more sense to bring the children to an excellent school than to put a school in every neighborhood.
I would like to respond to that. On that regard, I agree with you, making schools that we've got decent schools, meet modern standards and all of that. However, I pretty much gave up on the idea that you guys were ever going to listen to the idea of having neighborhood schools, so I just stopped getting my head against that wall. I went to the community input meeting in June and was told by one of the members, now Susan, we are not going to talk about neighborhood schools. I wasn't even there to talk about that. I went there to say, as long as we're not having a neighborhood school, why don't we take all of the children in Upper Falls and at least let them go to one school? In the area council, we were trying our best to have a sense of community. We started the Feast of the Falls and a few other things, trying to have a sense of community there. And now they're taking our children from, I believe there's one house where there's a two-family house, somebody from the kids from the upstairs are going to one school and the kids from the downstairs are going to another school. All of Upper Falls has become a buffer zone. And I personally believe it's outrageous, and that's the night I made the decision that I wanted to run. Not particularly against you, but just to get on board.
I just want to respond. I'll say all of Upper Falls has been a buffer zone. The Student Assignment Working Group, on which I served this past year, has made changes in response to a lot of the voices that we've heard from.
There are still children going to 3 schools from Upper Falls.
In response to what we've heard, the concern has been that anybody living in Upper Falls would go to, any child would go to any 3 schools, and a parent in a family wouldn't know where that was. So what we've done is we've taken half of Upper Falls and it's permanently assigned to Countryside, so everybody within a certain neighborhood will know exactly where they're going, where their neighbors are going. The northern half of Upper Falls is technically a buffer zone. They'll go to Ainger or Zervis, although the intention right now is to send everybody to Ainger. We'll see how the enrollments go over the next couple of years, but that's the intention. So this is an example of us working with the physical realities of the school spaces we have available, the organic realities of variable enrollment, and trying to be as responsive as we can be to a very legitimate concern expressed by the neighborhood.
Let's open it up to the audience. Questions?
Yes. Why doesn't anyone say that Ted Mann closed all the schools and libraries 30 years ago so that children have to be bused to school? Children should not have to be away from their parents all day long, especially at a young age. Why are you using the car school for children from Waban?
So our school is known as swing space right now, as we're renovating schools in other parts of the city.
Aren't you
Our
lucky
children
that
are going there.
aren't you lucky that a place in the city had room to bring the children?
Yes.
Ted Mann sold the schools for $1. He sold everything around
Let's
and the libraries. Well, I just want people to know the facts.
Let's let them respond, please, if you have any.
Well, I do agree that I think Ted Mann made some major mistakes 30 years ago. However, he's not here to defend himself, so I don't want to attack him. But like we said, I agree with Jackie about the mistakes that were made in the past, and that again, what we have to be going forward.
Sue, do you have anything that you want to add to that?
I can't take responsibility for what Ted Mann did 30 years ago. I do recognize that in hindsight it was short-sighted. We could have used some of these spaces, and we make do now with what we've got, and we try to make excellent school facilities on the sites that we currently own.
Any other questions? Yes. Mark?
Well, first of all, a neighborhood school isn't necessarily one that's small. A neighborhood school is one that's in your neighborhood. So to say that the average size of the school is smaller or larger is really irrelevant. The school committee decided that it would build somewhat larger schools and the students would have to be bused there.
Do you have a question, Mark?
Yeah, actually, I was trying to straighten out what the record actually is on this. The school committee, in fact, isn't it true that the school committee, no one on the school committee ran on this issue last election? So maybe now we could have a commitment by the candidates to what kind of schools they want. Do they want schools you can walk to? Do they want large schools?
I would like to answer that. I will definitely commit to advocating and doing my best to convince the other 7 people, assuming I'm elected, to get the other 7 people to, yes, let every neighborhood have a neighborhood school. No one neighborhood should be better than the other neighborhoods. We all
And I'll tell you, it's certainly no one neighborhood is better than another neighborhood. My focus, and I think the focus on the school committee and the school department, is to use the resources that we have as wisely as we can to provide the best education for our students. And I think building additional smaller schools in the neighborhoods in this day and age isn't the best use of our dollars.
I think we had another question back there.
Yes, so Steve has been in office for several years now, so I have a little bit of an idea of where he stands on different issues. But I was wondering if you could tell me if there are other issues that you are passionate about in the Newton Public Schools besides
That I'm
neighborhood
passionate
schools?
about?
Yes,
I'd be
yes.
happy to. I'm passionate about a lot of stuff. One is pre-K. I think we should have universal pre-K, and we need to have full-day kindergarten. And I have grandchildren that live in one of the poorest communities in Massachusetts, in Central Mass. They start their pre-K at 3 years old, so it's called pre-K 3, pre-K 4. They have kindergarten all day long. It is paid for by the town. And granted, because it's a poor community, I'm sure they get subsidies from the state. I haven't delved into their complete finances. But if a small town like that can do it, and we are certainly not a small poor town, and with, we're just not a small poor town. I really can't understand why it's taken this long. We should just say, yes, we are going to have pre-K, or at least kindergarten, and then next year have, pre-K 4, and then go to, there's no reason why these children can't start school at an earlier age and why we can't afford it.
Thank you. The clock is ticking. You each will have a minute to sum up, talk about your top priorities for the schools, anything that you want to convey to get the votes of the audience. Stephen?
I'd like to thank the Tri-Area Council, I'm not sure how you're calling yourselves, but the area councils of the Highlands, the Upper Falls, and London for hosting this event. I'd like to also thank everybody for coming out and giving us a chance to speak, and thank Susan for coming. We haven't appeared together in a format like this yet. I am very proud of the work that we've been doing on the school committee in support of our schools and of our children, and ask for your vote so that I can continue the work that I've been doing. And thank you again for coming.
I would like to also thank the area councils, all 3 of them, which I'm part of one, but I didn't do any work towards this, so thank the rest of you. Especially Sally, you did so much for this. And anyway, this is the first time I've ever been at a thing like this, not just with you, but with anyone. And so I hope I didn't embarrass myself. But what I would just like to ask for your vote also, not also, but instead of. This is not vote early and vote often. So anyway, I would like the chance to represent all of us and our children, and I just think Newton can do better, and I think I can help Newton do better.
Yay.
Thank you both so much. We have 3 candidates for Ward 8 Alderman at large. Actually, 2 are present. And while they're coming up, I can start my introduction. Rick Lippoff was born and raised in Newton and has been an alderman at large for 14 years. A real estate consultant by day, Rick is a member of the Latter Real Property Breeders, and Public Safety and Transportation Service. Frank Walton is a 43-year resident of Newton, the son of immigrant parents and an attorney. He's a CPA, professor emeritus, Newton Crime Prevention Commission chair, Newton Human Rights Commission Advisory Council member, and board member of the Newton Boys and Girls Club. Welcome to both of you.
Now I don't have to say all this thing.
That's right. Now we get down to this. Just so that we get to know you a little bit better, could you give some examples, or perhaps a few examples, of a time that you displayed leadership, in professional life, nonprofit life, but just what speaks to Rick or to Frank, and the leadership capacity that really is demanded of somebody on the board?
Well, I go back to the first term on the board when I was 30 years old. I came on, and people may remember Stop and Shop wanting to come to Needham Street. And the neighbors of Winchester Street area, everybody came out. What are you gonna do? What are you gonna do about Stop and Shop? It would be a disaster. It was 8,000 trips a day, 7 days a week. That's what Stop and Shop was going to represent. What we have there now looks large, but it's about 235 apartments, and it represents 800 trips a day. And everybody knows Needham Street and knows that 8,000 trips would have been a disaster. Led on that one, I even, at the dinner table, funny enough, had the attorney for Stop and Shop, who was a friend of the family, who would come to dinner and say, you know, you can't get this done. And I'm so proud that we held our ground. I did, the board did, and kept Stop and Shop from Needham Street.
Very good. Frank?
Yes, I'm trying to decide which one.
An embarrassment of riches.
Yeah, my first thought was to talk about how, when I was in Washington, I was invited by the White House for the Reagan administration, and I'm a Democrat, to work on a program involving cost control and waste in government, and to go through the whole government. One of the things I did there was, I got appointed as consultant to the Treasury, and one of the things I did was go to OMB, Office of Management and Budget, and got to be pretty familiar with working with budgets. We have budgets here in Newton as well, except on a smaller scale here. I noticed a line item at OMB, 500,000. Now in Washington, that's not much money, spending 500,000. But I was curious because it said something about the burden of paper tax returns and all the people they had to hire to process all those paper tax returns. So I was part of a team, you mentioned teams before, and our team began to talk about that, and we got the idea, well, you know, maybe we could get these things done electronically, you know? So we pushed that idea. Ultimately, Reagan did propose electronic filing. When he did, nobody thought it was going to be real, you know. The Congress said you got to get 80% of them filed electronically. In the first year, it was like 5%. But now, it's pretty comprehensive, and that one little idea has saved our national government over $1 billion a year. So that I think is one example of leadership. I could tell about what I did on the Crime Commission, but then that's something else.
We can move along.
Yeah.
There's been a lot of discussion about Wells Avenue, and I wonder what your thoughts are on Wells Avenue, what should happen with development there, and also the Northland property at the corner of Oak and Needham Street. Rick?
Wells Ave, I was adamantly against a 40B at the end of Wells Ave. To strand people in apartments at the end of a cul-de-sac, one way in, one way out, with no nightlife, with no public transportation, a building that was going to be the size of the Chestnut Hill Mall at the end of that cul-de-sac is just insane. And the developer told us all that we must do this because it's a dying park. Well, we just approved 2 Wells Ave, a 3-story renovation that is bringing commercial revenue, not residential, which is half the rate, to Wells Ave. We're considering another petition at 180 Wells Ave right now to double the size of the building. We don't have a lot of opportunities for commercial development in this city. Wells Ave is it. And we talked to the people who work down there. They want to stay on Wells. Some of them have left to go to Needham because the space isn't there. We're creating some additional office space right now on Wells Ave, and it's a thriving park.
And how about the Oak and Needham Street development prospect?
You know, I've heard of a few different things kicking around, some parcels coming together. We really don't have anything in front of us yet.
Okay, Frank, what is your thought on those particular development opportunities?
Wells Avenue, we've done a lot of thinking about that. My wife and I drove around Wells Avenue the other day in anticipation of you know, what could be done to get revenues up in this city. We're gonna need more revenue, and it occurred, we looked around, there's a lot of empty land there. And commercial development pays double the real estate tax. And I would like to see us get started with a boom in commercial development, because we have a $1 billion unfunded debt that needs to get paid. Mary Ruth Fuller has written a wonderful report about that, and it is a problem. The mayor has a plan. There are assumptions there that need to be tested, but it looks like we're going to need a lot of money to pay down that unfunded debt. I think new revenues from Wells Avenue, real estate, commercial real estate, would be a wonderful thing to do. We can go for commercial real estate so long as we're careful not to put it near the residential areas. Because if nothing else, I'm a populist candidate, and I care very much about the ordinary, regular person out there. If elected, I'd be out in the neighborhoods all the time. I'd be full-time.
Another neighborhood development issue in Ward 8 has to do with what is being called, you know, the McMansionizing of Oak Hill Park. And I wonder what your thoughts are. I mean, Oak Hill Park has always been kind of an entry point for people into the Newton housing scene. And I wonder if there are restrictions that you would recommend, or do you think things are going along just fine?
You know, the homes were built for returning war veterans, very small. They weren't built to the best standards. So you have an area that to save years ago, you know, it was difficult because a lot of these homes needed to be redeveloped. I think we missed an opportunity, and right now the mayor is talking about looking into the future with development, maybe overlay districts, trying to figure out where to put multiple larger, maybe denser developments. We could have also done this with Oak Hill Park. The time to do that has passed because so many of them have been redeveloped. To now go in and say, we're going to stop, and everybody else kind of missed the boat on that, is a hard thing to do as a government. I feel that if we should have done something in the past. We should have done an overlay district and really looked at that area and charted a course for development like we should do in every neighborhood.
Well, that brings us to the whole issue of zoning, possible zoning reforms in Newton. Frank, what are your thoughts on that? Is everything working just fine, or do we need to?
Well, they're working on it. I think David Kalis, our other candidate from Ward 8, is working on the zoning matter, and they're coming up with, there's too much red tape now. And I think that they're going to have some reforms. I mean, look,
Well, do you have any feeling about, you know, how you balance the conflicting needs for, say, affordable housing, greater density,
Well,
commercial and economic diversity, and maybe letting homeowners do what they want to do?
Of course.
You know what?
Well, I thought you
Go ahead.
All right.
Go ahead. I'll
First,
Yeah, you know, obviously we needed a whole housing program, a housing plan. And the overlay district is a fascinating one. I like that. It has to do with building a periphery of townhouses and things like that on the edge of the town, of the city. And they're very affordable. You can make townhouses so that the kids who grow up in Newton might be able to buy a home in Newton. And so we need more of that sort of thing.
You seem to have built
Well,
out
we have to change the rhetoric from what are we against, you know, to what are we for, and how are we going to do this all together. You can't just be a one-issue candidate or citizen. If you want affordable housing, you're going to have to consider taking some denser developments in our centers. If you want revenues to continue to rise, so your taxes stay down, You have to look at expansions of homes and yes, even some tear downs, because that's where we get our revenue and new growth. We have to talk about this differently and say, okay, I may not like this or that. We're never going to get everybody to buy in on where affordable housing goes, where denser, smaller units for retirees and younger people go. We have to start at the table with a little bit of a yes and a consideration than absolutely no.
Fran?
Yes.
That's
Yeah,
step,
yeah.
that's step one.
But I believe in affordable housing. I believe in more housing for the elderly. I believe in more housing for people with disabilities. I'm a populist candidate. I believe in trying to do more of what we can do altruistically for those who can't do it for themselves. He's talking about the Austin Street project. That apparently, that's been one of the most divisive issues about affordable housing in this city. A lot of people think it's great. A lot of people don't like it. And that means to me, as a populist candidate, that even though we all want affordable housing, we have to fix the process. In some other cities, they have citizen boards, committees, appointed by the mayor, who sit at the table at the beginning of the process. In this city, what we've done is we say, oh, we're gonna have public hearings. We, the aldermen, are gonna sit up here, and you know, gonna sit out there. And if you're gonna complain, we'll think about it. We're Big Brother. We'll think about it, and we'll decide what's best. I think we need to bring in the people from the neighborhoods with a seat at the table at the beginning of the process. They may not get what they want, but they'll be there from the beginning. So process is my concern about affordable housing, but I'm all for affordable housing.
Rick, could you respond to that? Because I've seen that in different areas of the city where people feel that a proposal is substantially along the way before, other residents who are not directly affected have a chance for input. Is there a way of reshaping the process so that it's more collaborative and you don't have no here and 40B here?
I have to be honest with you, we have a process. There's so many times that people come to a meeting, it just happened on Austin Street. Somebody stood up and said, I didn't know anything about this. I didn't know anything about this. Austin Street is going on for how many years now? And how many community meetings did we have at Newton North with all the different players in the city, inviting everybody in? I disagree with the notion that the public doesn't have a seat at the table. People say we move too slow because we have public hearings and we have meetings after meetings. I take issue with that. I think that people do have a seat at the table.
Okay, let's go to audience questions and then we'll have a chance.
Okay.
We have a striped sweater.
My question is about economic development in Newton. Recently we lost TripAdvisor. I believe they were going to initially build in Newton, if I understand correctly, and they were lured to Needham. There have been a lot of examples that I've heard of companies saying that it's hard to start a company and open up a business in Newton. I want to hear from each of the candidates as to what you think the state of leadership is on economic development in the city. What does Newton need to do differently? What could they have done with TripAdvisor? Was there a way for us to change the outcome of that?
Okay, yeah. I do believe that our mayor has made a lot of strides in dealing with economic development and bringing businesses. I just attended at Cario Farm, a meeting. Greg Reedman is doing a fantastic job with the N2 corridor and rising the profile of the city of Newton in the business community. Cario Farm is expanding. The reason why the two buildings want to expand is because we have people that want to stay here. There was an article in the tab of the Globe about just this, about business development in Newton. And if you read that, you would see that the 3 businesses that they interviewed for that, all of them said, it's not because Newton is not business friendly, we just didn't have enough space. And you've got Needham, which has a huge neighborhood that they are building up, and we have 1 one street of Wells Ave. So I found, that is what I keyed in on that article. Nobody said it was hard to do business. The space, they're growing so fast, TripAdvisor couldn't stay there. And they wanted to build their own building, and the space wasn't here.
Frank,
Question?
what can the city be doing more to develop its
What
economic?
do you think of the state of economic development and what does Newton need to do differently to make it easier to start businesses here, make it easier?
And you used the term leadership when you asked the question.
Well, we have an economic development council, we have a mayor,
Yeah.
various parties,
Various parties.
but from the mayor on down.
Let's put them
what
all
do you think
together.
is to-
Let's put them all together. Let's put all the various parties together. And the term leadership, one of the things I did in the United States Army was to get to become a major. And one thing you learn in the military is that leadership is the art of getting people to follow you, willingly, wanting to follow you, and not just telling them the way it's going to be. So leadership would be, Greg Reedman, you mentioned him, Newton Needham Chamber of Commerce. Sit him down at the table. You mentioned the table. This is the table. Out there is not the table. Get people at the table. Get Greg Reedman. Form a group, a citizens group dealing with commercial development. We have a lot of smart people in Newton. More smart people out in there than at City Hall. Forgive me. We're gifted, and we should get out into the neighborhoods and find some of the extremely capable people that we have in this community, and form them into different leadership groups.
Okay, before we go to audience questions, any more audience questions, I have a question for you. And I'm hoping for a relatively short answer. What do you sense the tax burden is? Too high, or should we be paying more? And because this links to the whole notion of the development of resources for the city and sources of revenue.
Well, if you look at our tax rate, and you look at our taxes, I'm in real estate, I own an appraisal company. I'm constantly looking at assessments all over the state, and we are not the highest. I don't even think we're in the top quarter. So our taxes are not as high as others. What was it?
Well, I was basically, they may not be as high as others. Is there a feeling that they're too high for people who are actually paying the not?
Well, it's all a function of the assessments on how your taxes are. But as a relative, as a tax rate, it's not as high as a lot of other communities. I do think that we need to be pretty proud that we've had one override in the history of our city. There are a lot of cities and towns that have had many. We have two? Two. Since I've been on the board, two. There are some cities and towns that have had 7, 8, 9, 10 overrides. Part of that had to do with the schools being sold when they shouldn't have, but that created revenues that kept us afloat.
Well, should we be looking at other sources of revenue? I mean, what about pilot payments in lieu of taxes? Should we?
That would be wonderful. That would be wonderful. Yes, the colleges would do
Payments
that.
in lieu of taxes, where nonprofit
Definitely,
institutions
definitely,
should.
yeah.
I mean, is that not an element of leadership in
Yes.
terms of pushing?
It's an ask.
Yes.
Yeah, to
Yes.
make the ask.
It's an ask. Well, when those asks are made, they're made at Boston College. They're made. There's no law that says our colleges have to pay us anything. Leadership, absolutely. The mayor has gone to the colleges. I think Boston College pays maybe $150,000 a year. I mean, I'd like to see even more than money. I'd like to see them get involved in our schools. I'd like to see them take some of their educational tools and bring them to us, some other value. But would I love to see them pay taxes? That's not the law.
Frank?
Yes, Rick said something interesting. He said the mayor did this and the mayor does that. We have a form of government here in the city of Newton where there are two co-equal branches. We have the executive and we have the Board of Aldermen. I would like to see the Board of Aldermen, if I'm elected as a member of the Board of Aldermen, to be more proactive. Groups of aldermen can go to Boston College and say, give us some more money. We just don't have to wait for the mayor. We can, so it's leadership, your term leadership was so important. I think that we should get more leadership out of the Board of Aldermen.
Okay, on that note, we have to go to closing statements, so you each have a minute. Frank, will you may want to build on what you just said, or bring up some other priorities of yours. There's 1 minute.
Oh, my highest priority is to get elected.
It's very good, but I just want to think a little beyond that.
Okay. Well, you know, there is an issue in this city, and that is about incumbency. Democracy is not about electing incumbents. Democracy is about giving other people a voice that can be heard. I'm delighted I'm a new candidate. Never done this before, done a lot of other things before. I've been heard, I'm being heard today, I've been heard out on the campaign trail around the city. We all have our strengths. Rick, by the way, is quite an expert in real estate. That is his strength. David Kalis, my other opponent, he's quite expert in zoning matters. I'm a financial expert. I've been, you know, a CPA and all of that stuff. And I think I could bring considerable value added to the Board of Aldermen. There is a GASB out there now, government, you're waving something.
Yes, it says stop.
Oh, stop, it says stop, okay. I will stop, but I hope to begin later.
Very good. Very nice turn of phrase. Rick,
Look, I was brought up in a political family, debating at the dinner table. My mother ran Teddy Mann's campaigns. My father was an alderman in the 70s. I served with him. We were the first father and son team, my sister Cheryl and I. We do not think we have ownership of the seat. We choose to do this. We choose to take 2-3 nights a week, telephone calls, representing the constituency, because we were taught you just don't work and go home. You do something for your community. You do something else. And this is what I choose, and I love to do it. Today I was dealing with a flooding situation on Dedham Street. There was a signage thing up on Upland Ave that I dealt with 2 days ago. You never see a lot of what we do representing people. But I also am engrossed in a lot of things that we're working on the board right now with zoning reform. I'm on public safety and transportation, land use and real property reuse. And there's so much we're engrossed in, and I just want to keep on working on these issues and serving everybody.
thank you so
Stop
much.
the
I think
nexus.
we could continue.
Why did you stop the nexus? I thought,
What's that?
I wish we could continue the discussion, but we have to move on, and it would be fun to sit around the dinner table with you. Three candidates for Ward 5 Alderman at large are coming up. They're all well known in the community. Deb Crossley, Chris Pitts, and Brian Davis. Chris Pitts is an award-winning producer and founder of the Pioneering Multimedia Company. He moved to Garden City in 2000 with his family. His children attend Phoenix Public Schools. Chris has served on the boards of arts organizations, community groups, and the ACLU, and is currently the vice president of the Waban Improvement Society, as well as an elected counselor on the Waban Area Council, where he directs the Future Planning Project. Brian Yates has been alderman at large on Ward 5 since 1987. He serves on the Zoning and Planning Committee, and Public Safety and Transportation Committee, and previously served on the Public Facilities, Community Preservation, and Real Property Committees. Three-term incumbent Deb Crossley leads the Public Facilities Committee and serves on the Land Use and Real Property Reuse Committee. Got that right? Sounds an awful lot like Brian. Oh, I see. Okay. Deb is also on the water, sewer, and storm water working group and the service group. She's a home-based practice architect, citizen activist, and volunteer, whose resume includes past president of the League of Women Voters and vice chair of the Newton Energy Commission, and on and on. The first question, just so that the audience can get to know you just a little bit better, is could you each talk a little bit about a time that you had to take a position against your personal conscience? What was the position and why did you take the stand that you did? Brian?
I can't think of an example that fits into that. I've tried to follow my conscience in some cases when it's unpopular on the board, and some members have questioned, why did you vote against so-and-so thing? And because it didn't seem to me to be the right thing under like our zoning standards. I can't think of a good example of the way you framed the question.
Okay. Anyone else, Deb?
That's a tough question too. I work very hard to vote according to my conscience. That's very important to me that I work according to and decide matters that come before us according to my principles.
Chris?
Well, I'm kind of in the same camp as both people here. I really haven't had to vote against my conscience on anything. I have forwarded ideas that have met opposition, and I had a mentor who always told me that if everybody agrees with your position, then there's probably something wrong with your position. So a little bit of opposition is a good thing to confirm and test your assumptions.
I guess the underlying premise of the question has to do with those times when the issue has you at odds with, or perhaps even outnumbered by the feelings among your constituents. And the question of how you deal with those issues, to what extent are you open to hearing about those?
That's a different question. I'll go for that one.
Okay.
So there are probably many times when any of us are confronted with differing views in the community, high emotions, controversy, and so forth. And I think it's our job. I know it's our job to not only marshal our facts, do the homework, make sure we understand the pros and cons of a situation, listen to people, because it's rare that someone who opposes your view doesn't also give you useful information to help shape a better solution. So listening is very important. It doesn't mean you're going to agree with everyone. As Chris just said, you can't agree with everyone. You ultimately have to make a decision, and some decisions are tough to make.
Chris, do you want to add anything to that?
Well, yeah, actually, it's interesting that you should say that, because I've been out talking to a lot of residents, and they really are against many of the 40B proposals. Austin Street, they're against that. They're really against the high-density buildings. And I know that Alderman Crossley has supported a lot of those things, including the 304 units that were proposed at Wells Avenue. And that should be really commercial space. We have a serious problem in our city. I actually call them the Big Six. That we have overcrowding in our schools. We have traffic. Seems to be what most people get. They see traffic is taking a lot longer to get around town. Our infrastructures, as you know, are really in need of help. Our green spaces some are being proposed to be traded off for parking or housing. As Mayor Ruth Ann Fuller, she got promoted at the last thing, but she's written a great report talking about our debt and acknowledging this problem, and this is going to be a really serious thing we have to deal with. Also, the cost of living. So I call this a Big Six. But all these things you can't do any development in this city without impacting all of those things, and you have to consider these things. So when I say, when you were bringing up, taking something and impacting it, well, it's very important to listen to the residents. I'm all about resident-centered planning. We need more of that, we need better planning.
Well, let me build on that and go to you, Brian, and then come back to Deb. Let me just build on that just a little bit to ask how you measure the effectiveness of your responsiveness to constituents. Is it by sending out newsletters and notices of meetings, or is it getting back to people when they reach out? What constitutes a high level and an effective level of constituent responsiveness?
Our part,
Yes.
well, getting reelected would be a good one.
That'll only take you so far.
Well, actually, I think going back to the question that, as I'm trying to think of this, there were some times when there was, I think, 5 of us, some of them in this room, who voted against taking the extra homes down for the Zerba school, that we thought there were other ways of achieving what was needed there. I think I was one of 2 people who voted against the Kessler Woods because it seemed to me that that massive construction in that area was not appropriate even. There was a consensus on the board, and we were in a minority. I think my major problem has been, and not responding to constituents, is that I do try to respond to constituents and represent their views, but all too often I find myself in the distinct minority. So it's, I think, my core constituents sort of like what I try to do, but they're not satisfied with the way things come out all the time. Occasionally, where there is a consensus on something that, particularly a report out from land use, that there would be a decent reason for voting against it, but there's also a decent reason for voting for it. So tie goes to the runner, and you give something that doesn't have substantial weaknesses in it.
Well, first I'd like to correct an inaccuracy by my opponent, Mr. Pitts. The Board of Aldermen does not vote on 40B projects, and I have never been on record in supporting a project because I can't vote on a 40B project. And in particular, if you want to talk about the Wells Avenue project, the Wells Avenue project we heard about a little bit earlier, and there was a lot of opposition to lifting the deed restriction, which is what the Board of Aldermen's role was. I actually did not vote at all on that. And the reason I did not vote at all on that is I felt, and I made my position quite clear, that the Board of Aldermen had not, the Land Use Committee had not spent a sufficient amount of time to understand the real implications of that project. I like to vote with a full deck. I like to understand exactly what it is that our work will impact. And I felt that we just simply hadn't taken enough time and dug deeply enough into that. You don't vote to satisfy any one particular individual or even any one particular group. You really try to make my decisions by balancing the impact of the project against the benefits of the project. And I work very hard to do that.
Is there an increased role for the alderman at large from Ward 5 dealing with the sense that Newton Upper Falls has kind of been overrun with developers taking down historic homes and replacing them with what some of the constituents have called mixed duplexes? To what extent can there be even more oversight of inspectional services and creating more opportunity for the public to weigh in on the whole city permitting process? And I think this actually applies all over the city.
Well, look, I think that one of the problems has been that the Inspectional Services Department has, on some occasions, given out permits that have turned out to be totally illegal. That the whole issue of a merger of small lots that is black letter state law was ignored by the Inspectional Services Department. Mr. Morey from Bradford Road in Newton Highlands is here, and he had to spend a lot of money, argue his case through several levels of the state courts because our inspection services department did the wrong thing, and then it had to be appealed. The ZBA tried to uphold the law, and they didn't, but then when it hit the court system, we were ruled wrong several times. I spoke out against it at every level. I filed a friend of the court brief with Alderman Baker, and we and the Maury's were upheld. But some department heads and some departments tend to have not a correct understanding of what the law is.
So is there no rules for a member of the Board of Aldermen and calling attention and, you know?
Well,
That's what I did.
can I jump in on the question here? Because this is kind of the reason I'm running, is it's about zoning and planning, it's about development, and it's about having our, I imagine everybody here knows that now they're teeing up what's called phase 2 of the zoning and planning, which is really the point where we're gonna actually start putting teeth and deciding what kind of rules and regulations we need to help preserve our neighborhoods and the character of our villages, and to bring more context to the zoning. This is the real failure of our current Frankenstein zoning plan. We really need to sort of start looking at the context. I mean, there was 2011, I believe, that they tried to change the FAR and the floor area ratio and the setbacks and things. They were looking for the extreme case, but in doing so, they made it possible for a lot of the McMansions or the monstrosities that people complain about. And I see these things. They are in Ward 8. They are everywhere. No neighborhood's immune. And we now, this is it. This is the time. We now need people who are considering this and will bring this kind of thoughtfulness and put some teeth in our zoning to protect us from this kind of land speculative, people taking advantage. I mean, developers are not planners. They're not city planners. They're business people. They look for a place where they can dig their teeth in and make some money. That's their only consideration. It's up to us to make plans and apply zoning rules that'll protect us from that kind of behavior.
So your question had to do with overdevelopment in New Niagara Falls, but I think that question can be applied broadly to the entire city. We all know there's a tremendous amount of development pressure on our city. And this has happened in years past. There's cycles of it. And every time it happens, the developers come in. Developers are in a money-making business, and they look for opportunities, and they build out to the maximum degree that we allow them to. So zoning reform is about changing our rules so that we can control what it is that gets built. And it's about taking another look at the city to determine where the development can go that we want. So and there's a lot in between. It's a process that we need to undertake. In 2011, I was asked to chair a zoning reform group, and I took 8 months to do this. It was a wholly volunteer entity. We put the word out broadly to the community and got stakeholders from just about every group that you could think of. We had hundreds of people involved in this, and we wrote a very succinct 12-page roadmap, if you will, for what zoning reform could look like. The first phase that was supposed to take a year wound up taking nearly 3 years. It's very important that we did this work. Turns out our zoning code was in much worse shape and more difficult to navigate and repair than anyone imagined. Plus, there were a lot of other business that got in the way. But we now have a zoning ordinance that you can see your way through, that any member of the community can pick up and read. It's illustrated, it's indexed, it's going on an electronic database, and we have clear maps.
All right, I want to go to audience questions, but I will get run out of town if I do not ask you for a short answer on what your thoughts are regarding the St. Philip Neri property. Chris?
Well, it's a terrible idea, actually, to put the 48 units and 106 parking spaces that were proposed by Mr. Argyros, the developer. And it took a lot of community organization to come up against that project. And it even took, actually the leadership of Kathy Winters helped us, as the area council, write a letter stating that the massing was too large, that the traffic was going to be a nightmare. I'm paraphrasing, of course, but it was real substantial, evidential type reasoning. And the city actually wrote a letter pretty much echoing what we said. I believe there were some 200 some letters that were written, and overwhelmingly were against this project. I think after, well, initially I know that Alderman Crosby supported it. Then I think after there was reasoning about the traffic, you wrote a very soft against letter, and I think the community knows that.
Deb, would you like to answer?
Well, can I just finish one thing? The one thing that's important to say about that is that the community was not against having housing there, or senior housing, or affordable housing. They really were against the size that was being proposed, and thought that allowing the developer to max it out was a bad idea.
So again, the developer here has proposed to put forward a 40B project, in other words, get a state comprehensive permit, which takes the alderman out of the picture. However, what you are able to, this project is still in play. This project has not been filed. This project has to go through a number of steps, and the first one was to have mass housing come out to the site. And there was a comment period where members of the community, the Waban Area Council, and individuals are able to write in their concerns about the project. In fact, I helped the Waban Area Council write its own statement. I sat with them for 3 hours at a council meeting to help write a statement that that addresses, and I don't believe that it was soft, it addressed some of the serious concerns that that project presents. To me, it's not the number of units of housing at any given location. There's always going to be a maximum number, but the number that you're able to have in a particular location has to relate to the impacts that the project really will have on that community. How does it impact traffic, circulation in particular? There's a couple of very dangerous, a very dangerous intersection in particular, and several that don't work now. So to add another project in a community at a location where you have unsafe intersections and traffic queuing up unacceptably, that has to be fixed before any project goes in.
Brian?
Yes, I spoke out against the visual impact. It really looked ugly in replacement for the church. And on the traffic issue, that the access would be not onto Beacon Street or Chestnut Street directly, but it would be off of side streets that are already overcrowded, has been said, and that where the access is almost impossible. But I would like to point out, I don't think you gave me zoning reform time, Margie.
Well, make it fast.
Well, the problem, I've been working on zoning reforms as a citizen, as a member of the zoning and planning committee. The problem with the existing zoning ordinance was not exactly, it was a Frankenstein monster, but it was a Frankenstein monster that was assembled in several parts over decades, 1940, 1953, 1967, and it deferred too much to the alleged experts and came out with stuff that was trying to prevent some far-fetched proclivity from developing, and in fact wound up opening more possibilities than it closed. So if we can do that now, if we can reflect the values of what's in the city, and we can protect what's there and allow for increased positive development, then that will be what we should be shooting for in the completion of the zoning reform.
Do we have one, thank you, Brian. Do we have one or two questions? One and then two.
Yes, I attended the land use hearings about whether or not to lift the deed restriction on Wells Avenue. And I also attended the public meetings about St. Philip Neri. And the record shows that Alderman Crossley spoke in favor of the 304-unit residential 40B development. It was that. The record shows it. And you and two of your colleagues were the only alders who walked out of the room on the other side of the bar to avoid voting. And I think that's
Good
not
question,
what...
Megan.
I'd like to know why you think as an alderman that it's your responsibility to overturn a rule of law and a deed restriction that protects commercial property that this city needs to have a commercial tax base to further your personal goals about housing.
Yeah.
They're not my personal goals. We have a very clear needs assessment for the city of Newton that was just drawn, that many of us in this room attended, and the reports are on file. We have a severe shortage of smaller apartment-style units for our young people and for ourselves and folks older than us as we age. I'm not finished yet. And
Oh, no.
I did not express support for the particular project. What I did was to say that housing is a reasonable idea for this lot. In fact, I wouldn't have supported a project that size at that. I wouldn't have supported that particular project. But I thought that we should consider mixed use at the Wells Avenue Office Park, as the MAPC report suggested we should, because mixed use developments are what are surviving in this economy. I felt, as I earlier said, that we didn't give it enough time. We didn't give it enough serious thought to come down with the decision that we did. And just one more thing, the board of Alderman, in fact, has overturned the deed restrictions on that particular parcel no fewer than 17 times in the life of the property.
All right, very quickly, because
I just want to clarify something that, first of all, Newton, if we're talking about affordable housing, Newton has a great legacy there. We were actually the first city in the Commonwealth to come up with inclusionary ordinances. We have 2,441 subsidized units. We have 152 group homes, and there are many properties that aren't even sort of on the radar. We have outdone our neighboring communities many times over with affordable housing. So when we're talking about these projects that have 17 units, 12 units, 4 units, realize we have 2,441 units already. You've done plenty for our affordable housing, and what's not being addressed, when I go back to the Big Six, one of the things that the school committee didn't say is that without adding a single house to Newton, we are looking at 650 more kids in the next 5 years. If I asked a question of Steve and Margaret, where are you going to put those kids? What schools are you going to build? That's like not a 16th school, that's a 19th school.
All right, Brian, very quickly, because I need to go to
I
closing.
went along with what Rick Lipoff said on the residential development down at Wells Avenue. Rick compared it, I think rightly, to having an elephant in your bedroom. An elephant may be a good thing, but it doesn't belong in your bedroom, and there was very poor access there. I would also say that I was at that housing task force this week, and what I heard was the consultant very clearly say that every time a teardown is done, the resulting units are much more costly. So every time you tear down a house, you wind up generating new residential units that have to be much more costly. And the only way around it is you up the density all the more to provide subsidies from the additional profit that the speculator gets on it. So I didn't hear anything positive. Actually, I asked that question, and they said, well, come in for the next workshops. We'll show you how to stop the city from being impacted by it.
All right, we have to go to closing now, minute each. Deb?
Okay, thank you. Thank you to the Ward 5 councils. I know it's a lot of work to put these things together, and I thank everyone who's come out tonight to become better informed voters. So I think, and I'll be very clear, I think it's our responsibility to care for our public place and our natural resources as we continually seek to improve the places we build to serve the people. That's housing and schools and public programs and services. In other words, we need to balance our community needs with wise environmental policy, careful stewardship, and fiscal responsibility. It's all important. Renewing and improving our built environment is essential. It's necessary. We have to do it. We have to serve the unmet need for more smaller housing opportunities, affordable and accessible to more people. That's critical. I believe if we get down to work, we can do this. It's all about having a constructive conversation and finding the right balance.
Chris?
Thank you.
I'd like to thank the area councils for having us here tonight. There's certainly a lot of differences between us. Someone said failing to plan is planning to fail. To get the best plans, you need those people who are most at stake in the room making those plans. Newton residents. Newton residents are highly educated, they're committed, and if they direct the process of shaping our future, they will ensure that we protect the things we love about our city. It makes no sense to have developers who are looking at short-term profits to be doing that for us. They're not city planners, they're not looking for what we're doing. I'd like to say so simply, if you believe that more density is necessary, in spite of the cost to our schools, our traffic, our open spaces, our infrastructure, and our mounting debt, then by all means, please vote for my opponent. But if you believe, as I do, that we can do better, please vote for me on November 3rd.
Thanks very much, Brian.
Yes. On the board, I've fought for what I call village values, to protect the environment, preserve the villages, and prevent overdevelopment. I do this because of my deep roots in the city. I'm a sixth-generation Newtonian. I graduated from the Newton Public Schools. I was an active user of the Upper Falls Branch Library. I would very much appreciate the opportunity to continue to fight for village values as a city councilor, as I've done as an alderman in the past.
Thank you very much. Okay, we are going to move now to the three candidates for Alderman at Large from Ward 3.
I am, but not so.
Yeah, thanks, sir. Appreciate that. Austin Street project.
I'm going to be right, the three candidates for Ward 3 Alderman at Large are Jim Crow, Ed Esmahan. Cody.
Just not this many times, but I don't know what it says.
Jim Cody, Ed Esmahan, and Julia Molly. Alderman at Large Jim Cody is completing his first term on the board, a former Marine Corps First Sergeant. Jim is serving on the committees of Land Use, Public Safety, and Transportation. Ted Esmahan has served as Alderman at Large for Ward 3 since 2003 and is chair of Land Use, Long Range Planning, and the Zoning Task Force, and is the Aldermanic representative on the Newton Fair Housing Committee. He is also a husband, father, an attorney, who says in that order, and has been actively involved with his church as well as school and community organizations since moving to Newton with his family in 1996. Julia Malachi grew up and currently lives in West Newton and works as a photojournalist with the Lowell Sun. She's the president of the Newton Tree Conservancy, active in Newton Villages Alliance, and blogs about trees, infrastructure, and development on Village 14. So, we have two incumbents on this panel, and we'll shape the question for you, Julia. I wonder if you could talk a little bit about a time that you might have dealt with an angry constituent? Was the complaint legitimate? What actions did you take? You know, what did you do afterward to make sure that your constituent was pleased with the outcome? And that must have gotten you in trouble doing photojournalism, perhaps in your, as a journalist, yes, I've certainly run into some controversy. So perhaps we can just adapt that question for your own life experiences. So why don't we start down with Cole?
Thank you very much. Yeah, that's an excellent question. When we run into our constituency, which is, and I'm, it can be all times of the night, of the day. Also, I'm sitting into it to try it out. So, I guess one of my hallmark events, you get a lot of constituents that they really have a lot of passionate concerns about what's going on in their neighborhood, what's going on with their development, whatever it may be. They come to you and they have a reason. And when they come in, you really can't discount that reason because you really have to address it. So I think there's been a lot of hallmark things I've worked on in my first term, and so it's getting my feet wet and finding out what's going on at the same time. But there's been some areas where the city's been with surplus and excess in properties. And I think when you look at surplus in property, we go back to what the conversation was earlier about, 30 years ago, they were letting schools go, and that's all city property. And I think we're looking at a couple of key locations now. One, we're looking at, convenience for the current residents of the city. We're looking at parking, et cetera, in Austin Street. And then we're looking over at another piece of city property, which is over at Crescent Street, which could be surplus into a nice little park for a very dense neighborhood. So I think when you hear a lot of constituent concerns like that, they're huge, and you really got to address them because they have that deep concern. But to take it on a real small situation, there was a case, which actually had come from Julia, which a constituent from one of the wards, not in my ward, had come to me and said, look, there's a developer coming in, and they're going to take down this sugar maple tree that I've been nurturing for years. So they had gone to their ward alderman, they'd gone to the city, and they went to everybody. And they all told them, well, we'll replace the tree with different calipers of inches, and we'll do all this kind of stuff. But at the end of the day, they wanted the tree saved. So I called up the developer, which nobody had done, and just spoke with them and said, look, what can we do to save this tree? And they did. So the tree's still there. It's standing. You can check out my Facebook page. And I think it's just a small accomplishment like that, but it was huge to that particular person. I think that's how I address my constituents.
Julia is a defender of trees. Would you like to?
I'm very happy to hear that, and I think I know the tree he's talking about. Because I get a lot of calls about trees. I don't have an exact analogy to that because as a journalist, we don't so much have constituents as people we cover and the people who are reading our material and seeing my photos. I guess the closest is when it could be as simple as covering a golf tournament, and you have to stand in front of people and you hear the people saying, I've been sitting here for 3 hours, and you have to just ignore things like that. And I probably didn't call the culture for photographing it after scenes and things like that. But basically, the approach, contrary to these two gentlemen, the approach is pretty much not to answer and just be as quiet as you can.
Can you fix your mic, please?
Sure.
So I have a very distinct memory of the very first time that I was dealing with a constituent who's not happy. And it's actually constituents who are not happy, and they were on both sides of an issue. It had to do with off-leash dog parks. And this had to have been, I actually was filling a vacancy, so I've been on the board maybe a couple weeks. We're at Aldermanic chambers, and there are some very angry people on both sides of the hallway. Pro off-leash and anti-off-leash. And in particular in one neighborhood close to me, Wellington Park, there were folks who at 6 in the morning would take their coffee and their dogs down there and let them off-leash. And I would get a call from the neighbors maybe 15 to 20 minutes later, and be trudging down, half dressed, to see what was going on down there. What I learned about that was that both sides had some legitimate concerns and complaints and goals. And just to give a shout out to one of my colleagues who's here tonight, is Susan Albright. She had the distinct honor and burden, I guess, of having chaired the off-leash dog park task force for a number of years, trying to come up with a solution. I say a number of years. This was not a small problem. Thousands of people with dogs who now have permits to take them off leash. That was a significant demand, and they were all scofflaws, basically. They let their dogs off leash for even a minute. You can imagine that they were angry, that they were getting ticketed and told they couldn't bring their dogs to the park. At the same time, you can imagine being the neighbors, or people who use the park, or people who use the top lots. I think it's absolutely correct, and several people have said it before here, listening is the most important thing. Being responsive is important, and you know what? Having a little sense of humor about it and a little sense of humility really helps. And you know, after 12 years, I have a well-developed sense of humility.
You know, it's interesting because we all joke about the dog park, but a lot of the issues that get people really agitated are issues that kind of deal with individual behavior. And over the years, the board has sought to control residents' behavior in ways large and small, dogs being just one example. We also hear now they're talking about banning leaf blowers and putting a ban on plastic bags. What's your position on these? What other bans would you propose? And how far should the board go in regulating these small bits of human behavior?
So one of the things that I'm actually most proud of is that I was able to get a prohibition against tobacco sales at retail pharmacies. Now that's not just individual behavior, that's corporate behavior. And I think that's bad corporate behavior. You can't, on the one hand, be selling smoking cessation pills and right next to them have cigarettes sold right there, or advertising that you're a medical center because you're giving out flu shots. So I think there are a lot of instances where it's legitimate to regulate, not necessarily entirely ban, but regulate certain kinds of commerce activity and so forth. The issue of leaf blowers is not one that's easy to solve. You've got people on both sides. Again, it's just like with off-leash dog parks. You've got folks who are very sensitive to noise, or who work at home, or have a daycare. And so when there's dust blowing and gas fumes and so forth, and they've got kids playing out in the backyard, they're all under the age of 5. They've got a legitimate concern there. At the same time, you've got landscapers, you've got people who own property, who, again, this is both a livelihood and also the only way that they can manage to get their yards cleaned up. And I think all your cross pointed out this before. One of the things that we try to do, the hardest thing that we try to do, is to balance the competing interests of the public. People are living in a city, we all share this community together. We share the burdens and, frankly, all of the riches of living in such a great community.
Jerry, you want to comment on how you sort these things out and when it's appropriate for the board to regulate behavior?
Yeah, it's an interesting question, Marjorie, because what happens is we can have budget deliberations for a $350 million budget, the entire school budget, everything all done, and nobody shows up. We basically have empty chambers that all goes on. And we go through the budget line item by line item. But now you bring into play something that's near and dear to people, and you bring in the crowd. So when you're talking about bags, or you're talking about leaf blowers, stuff like that, there's people that have legitimate concerns about these things. But you also got to weigh in the fact that business and market forces can sometimes control these things, and they can be guided to a process. And I think when you look at that, you say, yeah, it might be not the correct thing, maybe this is wrong, but you know what, they need to be educated, they need to bring everybody into the room. So like, there's a process going on now with small businesses, one with the leaf blower situation, and it's being vetted out, so it's being worked on. We haven't seen it in the full board yet. My inclination is I do not get in the way of small business. We work with them, we talk to them, we see if we can make solutions that work for them. Especially when you get small businesses that are operating for the benefit of the residents. So it's kind of a dual edge. So I jokingly have told people in the program and service, the Alderman program and services, my next ban would be program and services committee. So once we ban them, we wouldn't have all these proposals coming up. So then we could restructure.
It's actually the ninth circle of hell.
It's not really want to get on that committee, but anyway, I think we guys get a balance. I think people are generally adults. We have an extremely high percent of the population is college graduates. I think they can make a lot of informed decisions themselves. I don't think they need people to tell them what to do every time they turn around. So I am not for any kind of bans at all.
Julia?
Well, I think the leaf blower situation is a perfect example of where you do have to balance the competing interests. I think in general, the category of bans or behavior modifications, or whatever you want to call them, are most appropriate when what's being done is affecting other people. And with leaf blowers, as Ted mentioned, you have many people working from home, more people retired now, more stay-at-home parents, and just speaking from personal experience, in my case, it's the loud music I have to listen to at the Y sometimes. I know what it's like to have sound imposed on you that you have no control over, so there you have to balance the right of people to the peaceful enjoyment of their home with the efficiency of leaf blowers. And I think options have been proposed that would include a seasonal ban, and I think that's something that might be appropriate because I think often they're being used when there aren't even that many leaves to blow. But as an advocate for trees, I don't want to see people cutting down their trees because they feel they can't control their leaves, so I would like to leave that option.
All right, before we go to audience questions, what is your sense of tax burden in Newton? Are we too high, too low? Are we facing more overrides in the near future? And what would you favor as opportunities to expand revenue?
Well, you asked this before, and I think Alderman Lipoff mentioned that we're not even in the top half in terms of the tax rate. The reason your taxes are so high, yours too high because mine are too high too, it's because property value is high, all right? We have very high property values in the city, so the tax rates are low, but actually our taxes themselves are much higher. So what do we do about that? It was 2 years ago I was talking about other post-employment benefits, OPEB, and everyone was saying, looking at me like, is that a Middle Eastern oil cartel? It's a very serious problem. Our post-employment retirement benefits constitute over $1 billion in unfunded liability. We just got a recent report confirming that. That's a deep concern. What do you do to deal with that? Well, we can raise everybody's taxes, but we only get to do that by 2.5% per year, plus new growth, without the consent of the taxpayers. That's not a permanent solution, because you can keep raising and raising and raising people's taxes, but if your costs continue to skyrocket, you're not going to be able to do it. You've got to make some tough choices about cutting expenses, but in the end, we've got to work on growing the revenues and on economic development in the community.
Very quickly, what would you cut?
Well, I mean, the point is, we've got a plan right now to address the OPEB unfunded liabilities and the pension unfunded liabilities. It's going to be close to a 9% per year increase in what we're going to put into it. I don't want to cut anything. Nobody wants to cut anything. It's all about whose ox is getting gored, right? What we need to do, I think, is enlarge the pie and say we need to work on the economic growth piece. I know a lot of people say they're either pro or anti-development, but no one seems to be opposed to the kind of commercial development that we've gotten in the city. In fact, when I was chairing land use, we approved 2 of the biggest projects in the city, the street and the Chestnut Hill Square project, that have brought in literally millions of dollars in revenue. We can do that.
Julian?
Well, I agree that I think we need to really focus on commercial development. I think the city needs a business planner who focuses on commercial rather than residential development, because that will help our budget rather than hurt it in the long run. As Ted mentioned, we have, the mayor has a plan to pay down the almost $1 billion of unfunded liability, but it's really a mathematical formula for getting there. It doesn't say how we'll achieve the almost 9% increase in payment required every year, and that's going to be very challenging. I think we will need to look at any opportunities to change the way we deliver services, or the scope of the services we deliver. One idea I had, I don't know if it would be popular, but I don't know that we need weekly trash pickup. We might save money by doing every other week, because that's a big part of the budget. Like I said, I think we need to take a fresh look at some things like that, and basically pursue the the schedule and the best we can.
I don't think that passes the smell test.
So there's interesting questions with addressing taxes, but I think what you have to look at is the overall costs of residents in the city are increasing. When you look at the fees that have gone up, the cost of pay to play in the schools, the water rate restructuring, which I represent Ward 3, which is an area where they have a lot of concerns about cost rising. We have affordable housing there, but living in it. And I think when we look at the water bills that recently came out from this past summer, we could see that a lot of the rate restructuring had a negative impact on a lot of the residents. And I think when you're looking at stretching people's budgets and numbers, the ability to stay in Newton, you're looking at things like all the fees on top of the taxes. So it's not just how's our tax rates relate, it's how do our fees relate. What's it cost for a player to play a sport at Newton North? What's it cost for them to get into a club at Newton North? You know, there's a cost to all these things, and those costs are going up. And it's a tradition in Massachusetts, raise the fees, they don't see it. So that's kind of where we've been. Now, as far as how do you address that, we don't do enough on the budget. It kind of gets passed on voice vote right through as we go through it. So I have a lot of concerns with the budget this year. And I think what we have to look at is the fact that we need that line item a little bit better to find out what's going on. But so what both my opponents have said is that basically we need to look at other ways of raising more revenues. And that has to be through commercial. You know, there's no other way. We're taking the easy money from the developers, they jump in, it's a negative gain, they come out here, and they basically are telling us, you know, we'll put this development up, we'll give you so much tax revenue, et cetera, but that's negated within the first couple of years. But I think we can put commercial up, which hasn't been a big cash cow for development, so therefore they haven't gone after it. But I think we need to actually get in front of development and make that happen. We have to lead it, we have to guide it.
Thank you. Audience questions, very quickly? All right, we'll take one and then we'll go to close.
I'd like to ask all three candidates where they stand on asking the city of Boston to reimburse the school system for the approximately 500 students that we educate at our expense.
Could you repeat the question?
That's a good question.
Can you repeat the question, please? I would like to ask all three candidates.
Marjorie.
Somebody in the right.
You want to know whether someone on the board or will push the city to ask Boston to reimburse Newton for the 500 or so. Are you talking about Metco students now? For those students coming into the Newton schools?
All of the other.
Yeah, that's a good question. It's a great topic for discussion because we've been hearing that for years. The program's probably about 50 years old now. It started off with a variety of reasons. The reasons changed over time. And I think what we have to look at is we need to sit down and have serious discussions. When the mayor was at a breakfast with the mayor of Boston a year ago, the mayor of Boston said, hey, I got your back, we're going to take care of you guys, but he wasn't talking about reimbursing us. So I think what we need to do is have a serious conversation with the city of Boston and say that, look, you know, we don't mind this program, it's a great program, it's worked very well, we got a lot of great success stories coming out of it, and these success stories we can build upon. But fear being fair, the city needs to come up to us and talk to us about how we can make this more equitable for the residents of Newton.
Julia?
That's not really an issue I'm too familiar with. I would be interested in finding out if Boston reimburses any other cities or towns for their Metco students, and if they do, I think we should be entitled to the same reimbursement.
And if they don't?
Well, I think it's always been considered something that's kind of our contribution to education in Boston, and it would not be my top priority to try to eliminate it.
Well, in fact, I mean, we do get reimbursed is maybe the wrong word. We do get compensated. The state legislature gives us money every single year for Metco students. We've gotten millions over the years, and that pays for an awful lot of things in the school system. Only a very small part of that is actually paying for the cost of the number of additional students. There's a sort of a disconnect and misnomer where people think that every student you add to the school system adds the per capita cost of that student. So if it's $14,000 per capita that it costs to educate a child, you add one more child, it's going to cost $14,000 more, and one more, and one more, and one more. That's not the way it works. It's not the way it works because it's not the way it works in your household. If you're paying a mortgage and some of your kids move out, does your mortgage payment go down? Or if you have an extra kid, does your mortgage payment go down? Does your total household expenses decrease by that? No, it doesn't. Jim's got 10, so he knows.
The cost of showers, food.
Yeah. The point being that we do get compensated for it. I also agree with Julia. I think it's part of our social compact the racial imbalance in the Boston public schools and, by the way, in the suburban schools that was created by redlining, which was, by the way, a government policy of making it harder for people of color to find housing in the suburbs or anywhere outside of certain neighborhoods in Boston, is what created this problem of racial imbalance. And this is a problem that it's going to take more than just a couple decades to fix.
Okay, let's go to closings now. 1 minute each max. Julia, would you like to start?
Well, this is my first time running for any kind of office. It's been very challenging. I think that's one of the reasons why so few people run for alderman. And I know the workload, if I'm not elected, will be even more challenging. But I've been watching what's going on around the city. I've been watching our smaller houses get snapped up by developers, sometimes before they even go on the market. And I've met so many people who ask me, why does the city let this happen? This year, you have something you can do about that. We have several of us in competitive races, and we're all concerned about the effect that development is having on our city. Zoning reform is going to be a big subject in the next 2 years, and probably beyond, based on the length of time the first round took. So if you care about the future of what our city will look like, I hope you will vote for me, Julia Malachite, on November 3rd. Thank you.
Thank you. Jeff?
Thank you. I want to thank the Tri-Area Councils from Ward 5 for sponsoring this event tonight. I want to thank everybody who's come here tonight, because you know what makes a democracy work? Having all these folks here, informed voters. That's what democracy is about. Regardless of the result, participating is what it's all about. Listen, Newton has some serious problems and challenges and issues that we have to deal with. We need experienced leaders who have been able to rise to those challenges in the past. I've been on the board now for 12 years. I've been a leader on the board for my entire tenure there. I was chairman of a task force which updated outmoded zoning and eliminated a loophole in the zoning that allowed certain types of projects to get out from under any sort of restriction on house size. So I've done that kind of work before. I'm going to continue to work on the same sort of things I've been working on all along: quality of life, making Newton an age-friendly city, supporting our public schools, and also increasing the number of housing opportunities in our community. Please vote for me, Ted Esmahan, on November 3rd.
Thank you. Jeff Colson.
Cody, yeah, thank you. I'm really excited to run for my second term. I'm just getting my feet wet, a year and a half into it right now. 2 years is really a short period of time, so just getting going with this. I come from a background of military and municipal workers. My family, my father's a retired police officer for 32 years. Myself and 5 of my brothers served in the armed forces, like my kids served. So we have this community spirit. My wife sits on the board at Children's Hospital. I mean, our family is like, we're involved in the community. We volunteer, we do things. I came to the Board of Alderman with that same sense of purpose. And I think what I did to add value to the board was seeing concerns in areas like Crescent Street, where the neighborhood was really stressed out. They wanted to do something about the open space issue. I saw their pain on several different projects. And as I moved along and spoke to the residents, I realized that there were some better things to be done. And being a first-term alderman is almost like being a candidate, because you really don't get the time of day to get a lot of things done. And I think what we really need to do is push through as I move into my second term with some other folks that are looking to see some vision for the future of Newton. I think we really need to make things happen here. And I ask for your vote. I'm Jim Cody, and my website is codyward3.us. Thank you.
Thank you all so much. Our last race is the race for Ward 2 Alderman. All right. large are Susan Albright, Jake Auchincloss, Marcia Johnson, and Lynn LeBlanc. Susan Albright grew up and returned to raise her family in Newton, where she became a parent activist, school committee member, and chair and member of the Board of Alderman. In her day job, she's an IT professional, developing software used at Tufts and around the world, and as an alderman, she is a leader on the board where she says that she reflects Newton's core values and decisions she makes. That was submitted. Jake Auchincloss is a graduate of the Newton Public Schools and currently an MBA candidate at MIT Sloan School, where he leads the entrepreneurship competition. He has served as captain in the Marines, where he deployed twice in command of infantry, and is a member of Governor Baker's Better Government Transition Committee, where he leveraged his research on municipal policy at Harvard Kennedy School. Marcia Johnson is a 32-year resident of Newton and lifelong. Pardon me? 32-year resident of Newton and lifelong Democrat. She's been a member of the Board of Alderman leadership since 2001. Professionally, she is a senior director of human resources in the biopharma industry. And Lynn LeBlanc, and her family moved from Boston to Newton 16 years ago. Lynn is a senior lecturer in the classics department at the University of Massachusetts, Boston, and has volunteered extensively in the Newton Public Schools. She looks forward to representing the residents of Newton as Ward 2 Councilor required. Okay, we're going to start out first with a personal question. If life had a rewind button, what action have you taken or decision have you made that you really regret and would do over again? Let's start with you then.
I know what that answer is because I've thought of it many times. When I graduated from high school, I went to college and had a great time and took off more time than I should have. And so my regret has been that I didn't move forward as quickly as I should have through the college process.
Jay? I know you're young, but you must have been.
The first thing that comes to mind is I would have driven down Shipper's Road in Helmand Province, Afghanistan. We didn't have to be there, and that was not a decision I would make again, but more civilian oriented. My grandfather developed dementia when he was in his early 80s, and I was in college at the time, and we were not living in the same state. And I think I wish I had spent more time with him before we really stopped being able to recognize him.
Oh, Susan. Oh, sorry.
Want me to go?
Yes, please.
So that's an interesting question because every move, every way you decide to do things has an impact. And there's lots of things that I wonder, well, should I have done that? But I wouldn't have had the life that I've had without making the decisions that I did make. And it's funny because Jake reminds me of my son is here, he's gonna hear me saying this, but the only decision that I wish I'd done differently was the night that my father died. I wish I'd stayed in the hospital, but my son was with us and I think he was having a tough time with it, so I went home. But other than that, I think that, all the decisions led to a good conclusion.
Now to the easy policy stuff. Oh, I'm sorry. Please.
I guess the only regret of the decision that I made, but it has an upside to it. And when I was about to graduate from undergraduate school, and I had the offer on the table to go down to Africa in Cameroon to teach women and children how to speak English, and my minor was French. And this gentleman kind of came along and it's my husband. And I couldn't, because he couldn't go, so I turned that down. But my husband and I have been married for over 40 years, and I love him to death, but that's my only regret, that I didn't go into the Peace Corps.
Interesting. Very thoughtful answers, all of you. Okay, you are the ward now. The ward.
And that's what best for last, right?
That's right. The current Austin Street project is what is the best final outcome for the proposals for Austin Street? And looking just at the Austin Street project. And I guess wrapped into this is the whole notion of smart growth and what it means to you.